Hello, and welcome to the second episode of Stand Up Upstate, a regional podcast specific to South Carolina issues. My name is Nick,
I'm Anna,
and tonight we're going to dig into immigration.
as well as discussing the current administration's way of handling it and how it affects us here in the Upstate.
So maybe we should run through some definitions first, just to help set the context of what we're talking about, what these terms mean, and then we can talk about context in South Carolina.
These are things that you are going to hear over the course of both of our discussion and our interview later with Professor Will McCorkle. To start, undocumented immigrant. An undocumented immigrant, just full on by definition, is a person who is here by means that are not considered legal. They either came across a border without being inspected, is the official verbiage, without being inspected, or they were here on a visa or work or school that had since expired, and they've overstayed that visa, making them no longer able to be here legally.
And we've got different categories of immigrant as well. There's the ones we just referred to, which are undocumented, or who have overstayed their welcome and are no longer legally residing in the country. But we also have a significant portion of the population has immigrated here legally. All of us were immigrants at some point, at least the vast majority of us.
Yes.
But we also have a significant portion of the population in South Carolina that are legal immigrants that have gone through the process legally. They make up about 6.5% of the population, which is right around 350,000 as of 2024. The interesting part about that is they only make 6.5% of the population, but they make 7.8% of the workforce. So we have a positive contribution relative to native-born citizens for foreign-born immigrants in terms of how they participate in the workforce.
And those are immigrants that are currently here under legal status. In South Carolina, there's an estimated between 88 to 110,000 undocumented immigrants that are here in South Carolina. The bulk of them are from Mexico and Central America, but people can come from anywhere. There is no specific race, creed, or color that defines an immigrant, documented or undocumented.
I like to think of Mexico as our neighbors. So when I think of immigrants coming here, they're seeking to be American citizens, but they also come from a place that should be pretty familiar to us. And, we should seek to understand and treat with some sense of dignity or equality in the same way you would treat a neighbor down the street. These are just our neighboring countries. We do share the same continent with them. Now, of those 88,000 to 110,000 undocumented, the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy reports that the undocumented labor in South Carolina still pays taxes locally and federally. They pay something around $1.2 billion annually to South Carolina and local taxes, that's state and local taxes, and they pay almost double, $2.3 billion federally. So not only are they having a positive impact on the labor force by filling jobs in excess of what an average American citizen would fill, but they are paying into the system, a system that doesn't support them fully and doesn't really pay out to them. They don't get Social Security. Contrary to popular belief, they don't get medical benefits. They're not eligible for Medicaid or Medicare if they're undocumented. And they're paying into our system and helping keep our social protections like Social Security solvent. Without that labor force and without that tax revenue, we would be worse off and less stable as an economy.
Also, during this podcast, you are going to hear about 287G.
Yes.
You want to do 287G?
287G is very interesting. It as of, say, 2021, it wasn't very popular. There were only 3 counties of, I want to say there's 60 counties in South Carolina. Someone should fact check me on that. 287G isn't very popular. As of 2021, there were only 3 counties in South Carolina that participated. That number has multiplied up to 7 times. There are now around 20 counties that participate as of this year. as of October of this year, 2025. What 2287G means is it gives local law enforcement some ability to fill customs and immigration duties. The primary impact that it has on our communities today is it enables law enforcement who participate in this program to detain people under suspicion of an immigration violation. Doesn't mean proof, and it doesn't mean that it's something that happens after the person's already been detained for a crime. It basically opens the door for racial profiling, for police to say, that looks like someone who's here illegally, and to detain them without any evidence, only suspicion.
We will also talk a bit about DACA and Dreamers. DACA is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It is a 2012 Obama-era law that was put into place to assist children who were brought into the country by parents, and children themselves were not documented when they were brought in. It allows them to work and go to school and allows them certain rights within the country, given how they kind of hear of the no choice of their own. And we will speak a lot today about ICE, the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. It was created in 2003 as part of the Homeland Security Act and was ultimately a response to the 9/11 attacks.
We've seen the funding for ICE balloon significantly this year. So in addition to their normal funding, $170 billion has been approved across 4 years to fund ICE. One way of framing this is we're scaling up this supplementary police force, law enforcement agency that's dedicated to customs and immigration enforcement to come and remove these tax-paying undocumented immigrants who are filling jobs that we need to have filled, that we don't have the population to fill, and remove that tax income from our pool. So the math here is we're paying $170 billion across 4 years. That's going to come out of taxpayer dollars. And then the result is we're going to end up with around $10 billion less federally and $6 billion less locally in the state as a result of spending that $170 billion federally. So we really have to ask ourselves, what are we attempting by scaling up ICE? What is the end result here? We see a lot of reference to crime and criminals and trying to clean the streets, as it were. Yeah. But when you look at the numbers, you're only around 3 or 4% of immigrants are violent criminals. So that means for every 100 every, say, 96 hardworking, tax-paying immigrants, whether documented or not, we are capturing 3 or 4 criminals. The return on that is pretty low, I think, and in my personal opinion, we're scaling up a lot of manpower and spending a lot of money for very little return. And we'd benefit ourselves much more by having a more targeted approach rather than the let's train people for 8 hours and then send them on the street with a badge and a gun type approach. All right, let's pull up the interview from Will. We recorded this a couple weeks ago. This is Professor Will McCorkle. He is an educator here in South Carolina, and we're going to go through some local actions you can take, both here in the Upstate and in the Low Country near Charleston, as well as some resources and organizations that you can help support if you believe that human rights are important and that treating all people equally is important.
Hey, guys.
Hey.
How you doing?
Good. How are you, Will?
Oh, doing well.
Good.
Well, Greenville's a nice area. I was born down here, but I grew up in the north and came back. So I don't know if to say I'm a southerner or not. It's
We can be multifaceted. We can be multidimensional.
Yeah. I went to Clemson for grad school, and so I was living in Greenville at the time. Like I used to teach at Greenville High School.
Oh wow.
Yeah, but I've been in Charleston about a little over 7 years now. So yeah, it's been a while.
And still an educator.
Yeah, so I'm working at the college now, but yeah, still in education. This
I
good.
think it's the best job there is. My personal opinion is we could solve all of our problems with education.
Yeah, we need a
Um,
lot of it right now for sure. Without
amen.
a doubt.
uh, could you tell me a little bit more about exactly what what you teach?
So I teach right now, like educational foundations and a little bit of social studies methods. Um, and so a lot about the history of American education. And I've also taught some classes recently on education and immigration. And
Wow.
so looking at that intersection, and especially how it affects immigrant students and that the history of immigration as well, teaching students about that.
So bridging from education into immigration.
In 2019, I went to the border for the first time. I'd been to Mexico before, but I'd never been to the U.S. Mexican border. And so this was right at the height of the Remain in Mexico policy, where essentially Trump just said you're not allowed to seek asylum in the U.S. And so seeing these basically these large homeless encampments right on the other side of the border. And so for about 5 years, I brought churches, educators down to the border, did a lot of research down there as well, working, you know, with asylum seekers at the border. And I would say, in the last 5 or 6 months, my focus has kind of shifted again because the border is closed. Like there's not people waiting there to there's not asylum seekers waiting at the border anymore. If there are, it's very small amounts. The fact that they've just illegally said you can't seek asylum has not even like registered for most people because of everything else that's going on. ICE agents in the street arresting students for their political beliefs focus more on this local action, especially with rapid response networks, with ICE activity, both in start in the Charleston area, but we're trying to get this off the ground in the Upstate as well.
I had read some of your articles earlier today about I mean, obviously, all of your various expertise. And one of the things that you were talking about in one of your pieces was the sanctuary, the idea of like sanctuary. And you were calling out churches and actually all religious faiths as a whole. I appreciate the way that you targeted everyone in that broader sense. And but you were discussing the sanctuary and how it sort of started in the 80s, coming out of, well, not started in the 80s, but the more modern age of it started in the 80s on account of people coming from El Salvador. Are we heading towards a way or a place where that becomes an option for the people that are already here? Is that where this is going?
Unfortunately, it's it hasn't necessarily grown, partially because the administration's said that churches and schools and hospitals are no longer safe places. So before it was kind of this idea that I'm sure the government agents are not going to actually enter into a church and break down the walls of the church or the doors of the church to arrest someone, where now it's, is it actually a safe place anymore? And so I think in some ways the second Trump administration, like I've seen less talk about it just because there's a feeling of like, is this even a safe place anymore? Or like, is if the officials know that there's someone there that's seeking refuge, like, are we actually going to put them at risk because they're not going to respect that place anymore?
Right.
Um, kind of the norms have just been, you know, they've withered away so much where now it's like it's not unthinkable now for them to go into a church to arrest someone where maybe even a year or two ago you're like, ICE is never going to go that far.
Right.
We're not.
Yeah.
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 You started to allude to some actions that you're trying to get started in the upstate or move from perhaps your region out in Charleston up into the upstate. What are the important steps that you've seen to getting to where we are today, and like what is the status of ICE? And then we could talk about what actions we can take to protect ourselves and our neighbors.
Yeah, that's a good question because it in some ways, there wasn't necessarily this massive increase in deportations. Most of the human rights violations were happening at the border when people were crossing, and the child separation policy, family detention. For the most part, they didn't. I mean, they still had some ICE raids and stuff, but it wasn't anything like it was happening today.
We've seen a diversion of attention from ICE focused on the border to now they're freed up to focus on the interior.
Right. And I think part of it too is that they feel like they can get away with it now. Right. And they feel like it's one thing if the militarism's at the border and it's kind of out of sight, out of mind for people. It's another when it's happening in the streets of DC or Chicago or Portland or, Greenville. The amount of money that they put towards ICE and immigration detention was it's hard to even fathom. Like it's bigger than the military of a lot of large nations around the world. I think it's bigger than the military of Brazil, um, that we're just putting towards ICE. One organization with the Charleston hotline, so the CHS hotline, we're also starting one in the Upstate. We
Okay.
still need to get those social media pages up. Um, Another organization that we are working with in the Charleston area we're starting up is called Luke 4 Ministries, like based on the teachings of Jesus in Luke 4. And that's especially going to be working with trying to help people that have been affected by detention or deportation, families getting that legal support. This is the growing network, right? And I do think there is going to need to be more um, of this direct support, like organizations that are working to directly support people that are being affected by detentions. And that's one of the reasons we're starting this nonprofit is just because, we actually need to get something set up that can serve in that role. And so I think that's something that we're going to continue to work on. And that's one of the goals we have for the Upstate as well, is that the main purpose, right, is going to be this hotline about ICE activity, but ideally getting this group of people that's going to be working in some other areas as well to support people that are being affected by what's going on. Yeah, if you're interested in being involved, we'll put some more links to that in the in this podcast. But I think there's definitely ways to get involved here in the Upstate.
Well, I
Oh, I
mean,
don't
the
doubt
same
it.
thing that awakened me kind of with specifically one man being uh, uh, kidnapped and sent to the El Salvador prison. It was like, oh,
Yeah.
this is like we've crossed the red line here. I mean, from my perspective, like this is a violation of our Constitution. Like this is, if one person doesn't have due process, then none of us have it. How can we sit here and tolerate this on either side of the political fence? I appreciate you instilling a little bit more fire into the immediate action is needed, and the scale of civil disobedience that's needed is, I mean, we're taking baby steps in that direction in the Upstate, but we've got to get to the place where we're not politely parading in a park, but like loudly lambasting on Main Street. Like,
Keep that alliteration though.
yeah, I did my
He's
best.
our slogan guy.
Yeah, I think and I hope in 5 or 10 years that like this we can be like, oh, I don't need to be so
Let's
urgent
never
about what's
do
going
that
on.
again. Sorry,
Yeah, I don't
yeah.
have to be so urgent about things politically. Like I can be like somewhat engaged, but you're like this is the moment where it's like this is the window where spend a little less on some hobbies and like put the focus on this for at least the
It's
next.
a sprint. It's not a
Right.
marathon. It's a
Right.
sprint.
Yeah, so putting as much as we can right now.
There were a lot of videos that I saw after the Jimmy Kimmel thing of people being like, if you're complaining about having to cancel Hulu, you're not going to do well as things progress. Like, if you
Yeah.
can't live without Hulu, you have big problems. Like,
Yeah.
it may get harder. You know what
Right.
I mean? Like, and Hulu is not your biggest problem, girl. This is
Right.
sort of
Yeah.
effectively where that was going. So,
And I hope everyone watching is willing to keep an open mind and to continue to be educated. You made such a good point about once you've met and you have an LGBTQ friend, then it's very hard for that. You become less permeable, susceptible to that rhetoric because you're like, no, I have direct experience with this person who is a human being. They're as complex as I am. They have the same problems that I have, and their opinion and their perspective is valid. I mean, we need to get to that place of understanding with immigrants as well.
You can't deny their personhood at that point.
Yeah.
Getting back to acknowledging that, everybody is important. And that's sort of where it sort of comes back to.
Right. And not realize, and if you happen to have a gay friend or an undocumented friend, right, that they're not the exception to the rule, right? Like I think this is the other, sometimes it happens. And I've talked to people like, yeah, I like my friend, but they're different than the most people that they're targeting, right? Like
the asterisk,
the classic, one of the good ones, yeah.
Right. And so I think it does help, but I think even then, like and I think that's what people have this like, again, this internal tension because they're like, oh, I love my friend, but they're not. But it's everyone else that most people are actually like your friend, right? Like I think that's where statistics. My mom was talking about that. She was talking to some of her friends who are had some fairly anti-immigrant perspectives, and but a lot of this was this idea of, well, they're just going after criminals. Like, oh, they're not going to go after the person I know who's undocumented. They're just going after. And I think that's where like coming in with this data and statistics showing 93%, I think it was, of people that have been picked up by ICE have no violent criminal backgrounds.
93%. That's wild.
And so it's the exception is really the rule, right? It's like most people are not. Yes, you're going to find a violent criminal that gets arrested, but like most people are the person that is the innocent person. So they're not the exception. Like that's what's happening daily across the country.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure chatting with you and getting to know you. Stay in touch, if only to start to lend support to your organizations, continue to publish things through our platform, and then see if anything in the Upstate evolves and how we can contribute and direct people in that to those organizations as well.
Okay, well, great. Yeah, and I'll send you. We need to get actually the social media pages up, so I'll send those to you as well.
Well, and we're still working on our web pages, and it's definitely something that we can link to even in the absence of the podcast. We're all about intermingling ourselves at this point and getting words out the way we need.
Well, thank you all so much. I hope it wasn't too grim.
No, I think we did okay. We're doing part of the solution right now. We're spreading information. We're educating. Yes, this is bad stuff, but we understand how it happened, why it happened, and what to do. And all we need to do is keep pushing and getting people rowing in the same direction. All right. Thank you, Will. That was wonderful. Gosh, we got to have that guy on again. What were your thoughts on the interview?
Yeah, I would say he was a lot of fun. He was a lot of fun. He was a really fun guy, but also he was informative. And it can be really difficult sometimes to find someone to interview who manages to be both informative and entertaining. And we got lucky with Will.
Hit the jackpot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Other topics that have come up nationally have been the detention centers. So in addition to the ICE funding, we've also had funding set aside for new detention centers. In Florida, we've seen the Alligator Alcatraz.
Amongst the people who are fighting the Alligator Alcatraz building itself, like completely excluding the idea that whether or not we should be sticking people into it. All of that aside, Friends of the Everglades have been fighting lawsuits regularly, trying to stop it from being used to help preserve the swampland and marshland that is the Everglades itself.
So just the impact of the construction itself is having a negative effect.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Even on just a sheer environmental issue, there are people who are regularly filing lawsuits trying to stop it.
And I think there's a lot of us who don't want to see people thrown in cages with very little oversight as a part of just coming from what we believe, regardless of political, but more of moral values. A lot of the behavior that we've seen in the last 6 months makes me question, like, are we really in touch with our values? What are the values that we find important and uphold as a nation?
Well, and I think that's where part of the problem lies, is who decides the values for a whole country. Is that you're not going to get people necessarily agree. And then I feel like that's where the lines start to get drawn.
Yeah.
And the lines are very deeply drawn these days.
Yeah. At least the politically dominant party right now, the Republican Party, subscribes to New Testament ideals and values. So they identify as Christian. And a big part of Christianity and what Jesus taught was loving your neighbor, even loving your enemy, which was stark contrast to Old Testament learnings. And I think we're not really embodying those values when we separate families, children and parents from each other. When we pull people off the street, when we intercept people who are trying to go through the process legally, and we show up at their court date hearing, and when they leave the court, they are being arrested.
Well, and it brings up a multitude of issues. It gets into our values. It gets into like environmental issues, but also it gets into issues of constitutional crisis.
Yeah,
the whole due process thing.
Yeah, it's very clearly outlined in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights that Fourth Amendment protections are granted to all persons in the United States. And the reason that is if there isn't due process in place, how do you determine who's a citizen and who's not a citizen? If you don't have due process for everyone who is within our boundaries, then anyone can be picked up for any reason. Including citizens. If you're not carrying your passport with you, how would you demonstrate that you're a citizen? If you happen to not have a driver's license, you would not be afforded the opportunity to validate your legal status before you would be potentially deported. Like who was the man who was deported to Venezuela?
Omar Abrego Garcia, and actually it was El Salvador.
El Salvador.
It was where he was originally from.
Huh.
And while he was from there, he was here legally. A judge granted him a legal stay because he was running from gang violence in his home in El Salvador. So he was not here illegally. And actually at this point, he is still detained. He's detained in Virginia. They have charges that they have attempted to put forth against him that has allowed them to detain him. And based on the last update that I had heard, they are trying to send him to Liberia.
Oh, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They are working on sending him to Liberia. Like that is the next what the administration would currently like to have done with Mr. Abrego Garcia.
So we've already seen in very early days that if due process isn't protected for all, even people who are here legally do not have or can be essentially kidnapped and sent to a foreign country's prison.
But you made a really interesting point, though, about values and things like national values and the Constitution and things of these things. This is bigger than party. It's bigger than politics. It's past that point. We're talking about human beings who live in this country, who pay taxes, and who are people. I can't stress the people part enough. And this is not, when we are discussing these things are being undertaken by one specific party. And so it sort of starts to feel like we're kind of ganging up on them necessarily. This is just what's happening. And we're just trying to get out there what's happening, regardless of beating anybody up politically, so to speak. To drag this back to South Carolina, essentially the Palmetto Pen, which would be an alligator Alcatraz for the South. It's a sweet tea alligator Alcatraz. Modeled after the facility in Florida, the Palmetto Pen would be a secure, isolated prison designed to detain individuals with a criminal record. It would provide law enforcement with the tools to safely hold these individuals and ease the burdens on existing local and state jails.
Do you know if we'll have the opportunity to vote on whether our tax dollars go towards this sort of endeavor?
So I took a look at our local representatives and what their feelings are about the immigration issue at this moment. Most of them are falling along the same lines as the current administration, just to sort of various degrees.
Things to keep in mind when you head to the polls this year and next year.
The way that it's being presented is we are trying to take crime off the streets, and we are trying to make things safer for everybody and all parties involved. when it's put out there, it's a little hard to argue with. But what we're actually seeing makes it a little difficult to, one, believe that that is actually the case, just purely in the way it's being implemented.
I agree. What we're seeing is 20-to-1 ratio of people who are violent criminals to not being targeted. What we're seeing is a disproportionate focus on blue cities and blue states for the deployment of National Guard and ICE. And what we're seeing is a financial investment that doesn't appear to have a solid return. We're investing hundreds of billions of dollars in order to reap less taxes and to have less able-bodied workers in our country, which does have an aging and declining population.
Them not allowing undocumented children to be in group homes or foster homes. So where are these kids put? Where are they going? One of the bigger problems with this is the separation of families that has been going on for the last 10 years, and the ethics and morals of that. And how do we sort of get to the point where, sending children back to countries by themselves is more important?
This is another issue that transcends politics. It's not about what do you believe is most profitable or in terms of best for our economy, best for our culture. It's a question of what are our values and are we comfortable drawing a line between what is right and what is wrong? And do ends justify means or not? And I would say no. Like, as a country that has defined itself as an opponent to evil globally, we are in a position now where on a small scale, we are separating children from their families. We're using undue violence and force in enforcement of a policy, which, right or wrong, if you believe people should be targeted this aggressively, there's still a right and a wrong way to do it. And there's a legal and an illegal way to handle undocumented immigrants. And we're doing it the wrong way and the illegal way.
And the lack of due process is disturbing for everyone.
Yeah. If the constitutional protections are removed from one group, then they can be removed from any group. I would like to close out here just with a quote, the poem that's listed on our Statue of Liberty. You should all be familiar with parts of it, but I think it applies in this case. I mean, we're talking about people coming into the country and being mistreated on our property under our watch, and it's in violation to our country's values. Here's the poem. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Hope you all can take this to heart. Have a great rest of the week. Like and subscribe.